Marcia was walking home from the store one afternoon when she spotted her neighbors out in the yard playing. Arnold was swinging a broomstick in the air and laughing. Sally clapped and giggled with joy as the brown, feathery thing on the end of the stick flew down past her face and then high up in the air. With each swish of the stick, Marcia could hear a high-pitched chirping noise, almost like a shriek. As she walked closer, she realized that her neighbors had a brown bird on the end of their stick. Why did the bird stay on? Marcia got closer and saw, to her horror, that the poor bird was glued to the stick. Marcia chided her neighbors, pointing out the cruelty of their actions. Arnold and Sally hung their heads in shame. They apologized, saying that they had no idea that the bird would mind having a little fun. They gave Marcia the bird on the stick and went inside. Marcia took the stick and carefully examined the bird. The bird looked frightened but seemed otherwise healthy. Sally and Arnold had used superglue to attach the bird to the stick. Carefully pouring solvent onto the stick, she was able to gently loosen the bird's feet. When she finished, Marcia expected the bird to simply fly away. But it couldn't. It had been terrorized by her neighbors, and she was afraid to leave the stick. Even though the stick was the instrument of torture for Brown Bird, it was all she knew. Even though the broomstick frightened Brown Bird, she kept coming back to it. With patience, Marcia tried to train the bird to hop off the stick. First, she would place the stick on the ground and coax the bird off with birdseed. Brown Bird would hop off the stick, eat the seed, and then hop back on, with a frightened look in her eye. When Brown Bird finally seemed to accept eating off the stick, Marcia moved the stick a little higher and a little further away from the food. After several days of patient training, Brown Bird was finally allowing Marcia to feed her further and further away from the stick. Then, one day, Marcia hid the stick from Brown Bird while she was eating. Brown Bird was frantic. She didn't know what to do. Marcia offered Brown Bird her arm. Reluctantly, Brown Bird accepted. This had been a drastic move on Marcia's part. What if Brown Bird really panicked? What if Brown Bird wouldn't trust her anymore? These were worrisome questions, but Marcia had to try it. If Brown Bird were to ever be free again, she would have to learn to move on. She would have to learn to be free of the broomstick. Slowly and carefully, Marcia went about rebuilding the bird's trust in her. She protected her, fed her, nurtured her in every way she could. Brown Bird knew that these were important lessons, and she knew she must learn to be free again. But sometimes Brown Bird would feel so overwhelmed by the possibility of being on her own. Brown Bird just wanted to give up. Sometimes at night, Marcia could hear Brown Bird crying. She wanted to tell Brown Bird it would be okay. Marcia would just take care of her for the rest of her life. For a while, Marcia quit pushing Brown Bird. She gave up trying to help Brown Bird to be free again. Instead of making Brown Bird fly around the garden, Marcia let Brown Bird stay in her cage. She brought Brown Bird all of her food and all of her water. This was easier, and it made her feel good to care for Brown Bird. Instead of making her happy, Marcia could see that Brown Bird was getting sadder and more afraid. Soon, Brown Bird was no longer eating, and she refused to leave her cage. The more Marcia did for Brown Bird, the sadder and more afraid Brown Bird became. One day, Marcia realized that Brown Bird would never be really happy until she was back in the trees. Brown Bird needed to be with other birds. She needed to be flying free, finding her own food, and nurturing herself. So, Marcia began the long, arduous task of coaxing Brown Bird out of the cage and back into the world. Marcia started to take Brown Bird back into the garden to force her to fly. Marcia made Brown Bird search for food she had hidden in the garden and to begin to take care of the things she needed. Brown Bird eventually grew stronger and stronger. She was able to fly off of Marcia's arm for longer periods. Finally, Marcia and Brown Bird both knew that the day had come. It was time for Brown Bird to go back into the forest and be with the other birds. So, Marcia took Brown Bird into the forest. She walked deeper and deeper into the forest. But there were no other birds. Marcia kept walking, kept listening, kept looking. Finally, off in the distance, Marcia could hear the calls of other birds. She started walking toward the sounds. Marcia could feel Brown Bird tense with anticipation. Marcia knew Brown Bird was worried. She wondered whether the other birds would accept her. Marcia reached a clearing. There, on the other side, she could see all the other birds. It seemed almost as if they were waiting for Brown Bird. But waiting for what? Waiting to pass judgment on her? Brown Bird looked out from the edge of the clearing. She knew what was expected. Brown Bird looked at Marcia and Marcia looked back at Brown Bird. Then, Brown Bird took off from Marcia's arm with a whoosh, but she was scared. Brown Bird only flew a little way out, and then she flew back. She just couldn't do it. It was too scary to go out on her own. Marcia had brought the bird cage. Brown Bird had mixed emotions as she flew to the cage. It felt like the cage should be safe, but at the same time, it was really a prison, wasn't it? And people and birds don't like prisons, right? Marcia was still there. Brown Bird flew past the cage onto Marcia's outstretched arm. She felt bad because she had failed to make it across the clearing. Marcia assured Brown Bird that it would be all right. They both understood that leaving took great courage. And they were both encouraged that Brown Bird had not chosen to fly back into her cage. Brown Bird made another attempt. This time she made it a third of the way across the field. But once again, she flew back to Marcia. Marcia held her, hugged her, reassured her. She reminded Brown Bird how she was able to go a little further with each attempt. Brown Bird made another attempt, almost getting across the clearing before circling back. Marcia was patient. She let her gather her strength before sending Brown Bird off across the field one more time. Once she had calmed herself, Brown Bird drew herself up, determined that she would go all the way into the trees and meet with the other birds. Brown Bird took off for the last time. She made it all the way across the clearing. She landed in the branches and found herself sitting among the other birds. The other birds were beautiful. They were all the colors of the rainbow. The beauty of the brilliant colors almost took Marcia's breath away. Marcia waited under a tree so that Brown Bird would have a chance to get acquainted with the other birds. Even as she watched, she worried about Brown Bird. Brown Bird was even more worried than Marcia. "I'm so plain. I'm so brown. I'm just plain brown," thought Brown Bird. Shortly after Brown Bird landed, all of the other birds flew off. Marcia was dismayed as she watched the other birds fly away. Brown Bird looked so sad, so alone. Marcia could feel Brown Bird's loneliness all the way across the field. Marcia was about to step out and call Brown Bird back. But she thought, "No, I need to wait a little longer. Brown Bird needs a chance to do this on her own." Then, with a rush of wings and flashes of brilliant colors, a cloud of birds descended on the limbs around Brown Bird. All the birds were back, and they were singing praises of joy and welcome. Brown Bird was the most unique bird any of them had seen. No one had seen a bird with her colors before. Brown Bird was not just plain brown as she thought. She had beautiful shades of brown and gold flecks. Marcia's heart lifted with joy as she watched Brown Bird's acceptance into the flock. And Brown Bird began to sing. Marcia had never heard Brown Bird sing before. Her tune was beautiful, melodic, and warm. Marcia knew that despite all the pain, despite all the doubts, she had done the right thing. Brown Bird could be free and independent. She no longer needed Marcia to provide for her. As Marcia turned to make her way home through the forest, she felt a mixture of joy and sadness. She was happy for Brown Bird. Brown Bird had learned to overcome her fears and left the terror of the broomstick far behind. Brown Bird was among her friends and was starting a new life. Marcia also felt sadness. She would miss Brown Bird. She had grown to love Brown Bird, and she would have gladly kept her the rest of her life. But Marcia knew Brown Bird would go on to build a full and joyful life. Maybe now it was time for Marcia to get on with the rest of her life, too. The end.